Hi everyone for this webinar about XBRL filing rules that will be presented by Eric Jarry, who is from XBRL France and was formerly at Banque de France and publishing taxonomies and filing rules. Just as a reminder about this webinar, we will have a short presentation by Eric first, and then we will have questions, so you can ask questions, and I will be there to ask those questions directly to Eric at the end of the session, but feel free to ask any moment from your Zoom panel. And without other introduction. First, thank you, Eric, for presenting us that topic. And before we go into a discussion, I propose we go into the presentation about what is required, what is to avoid, and how to publish, and what XBRL International has published as documentation about it. Thank you.
Hello, good morning or good whatever. I'm Eric Jarry. I have been responsible of the XBRL Skill Center of Banque de France for 10 years, about 10 years, and I'm now retired, but I'm still active. I have been involved in development of taxonomies in Banque de France and in the banking and insurance supervision for EBA and EIOPA. And I've been very involved, I would say, in filing rules definition. So that is the agenda. So I propose to go on. So what are filing rules? We have to preparers have to send reports, and these reports must conform to XBRL specifications and XBRL taxonomies defined by regulators. So typically, these taxonomies define the data and their validation. So as much as possible should be in these taxonomies. For example, business validation should all be in taxonomy if possible. For example, the fact that the fact must be reported, the check of values for aggregations, checking positive value, checking the structure of components, for example, for ISIN code and so on, ratios. But more information is needed to be able to send reports to your supervisor, to your collector. So, for example, you have to define which taxonomy to use, which specifications, which versions. If there are limits in your collector system, for example, size limit, they should be defined. Oh. You have to define the precision. For example, the precision for amounts. Typically, the precision for the value of a share is larger than the precision for an element of the balance sheet. The currencies that you accept, for example, in the European supervision, the currency depends of the country. Eurozone countries, Eurozone may accept euro and maybe other currency. Scandinavian countries accept only crowns and so on. The language is to be used for the text. So all this kind of information has to be provided to the preparers so they can send their report to their collector. The issue is that some filing rules may be too stringent, and there is a balance to be made between collectors should accept or must accept whatever is valid and conform to the specification. We limit to the maximum. For example, we forbid a lot of things. For example, duplicate information, duplicate context, and so on. We will discuss about how how to determine this balance and what is the kind of filing rules to be defined. The issue is that when collector specify too much filing rules, it burdens the system because the software provider has to adapt their software to the specificities of the collector instead of using a standard XBRL compatible system. For example, there are issues about the reasonable size of IDs, length of strings, use of clinical prefixes. We have seen IDs containing a lot of meta information for traceability. So we had IDs having more than 200 characters. And when we have reports about that makes up about several thousand of information, leading to gigabyte reports, this may cause performance issues. You have to be aware that for a collector, there are deadlines. And when the deadlines approach, the number of reports that the collector receives may be very important. Okay? So we may receive about more than 1,000 reports a day in Banque de France. Could you go on, Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay. So we will discuss about the different classes of filing rules. So first we have to define the standards. I mean XBRL recommendation and all other standards that are used, for example, AEI standards and currency and so on, and what versions. We have to be aware that once a standard is defined, it may take some time for software provider and preparer to adapt their system to this new standard. And some reasonable time must best occur between the recommendation of this standard and the time that you can use in the systems. Typically, we have seen in some cases only a few months, and clearly that's not enough. We need, in my opinion, at least one year between the recommendation status and the use of a standard. Of course, we have to define in the filing rules the reference taxonomy, what taxonomy to use for some reports, which version of the taxonomy, how it's possible to use old taxonomy, the previous year's taxonomy, for example, for some reports, possible, for example, for some ESMA taxonomies. You have to define the constraint and the built-in dimension, that is characteristics that are above the taxonomy-defined dimensions, the period. Is it possible to define the specific time in a day or only a day? For example, for banking and insurance reports in Europe, all the data have a period type of instant. So since it's very difficult to handle with period, we have decided to use only instant for defining the end of the reporting period plus a dimension defining the period. For example, the date may be 21st of December, and the period may be one quarter or one semester or 1 year. That is more easy to handle when you, especially in some instances in insurance supervision, when you have very special reporting period, for example, any date in the year. We have to define the entity identification. More and more, the LEI is used for identification. We have to define the units to be used. Typically, we define currency unit, but moreover, we have other type of numeric data, for example, number of subsidiaries, number of teller machine, number of employees, and so on. So as much as possible, ISO standards or unit release standard unit, excuse me, must be used. But there is some two different schools for unit. For the numeric values that are not amount, you may use either the pure unit, that is, you don't define the unit, and you know when you report the number of teller machine, it's the number of teller. When you report the number of subsidiaries, it's the subsidiaries. And the other school being that you have to define the unit. So you have a unit which is a teller machine, you have a unit which is a subsidiary, and so on. You have to handle how to specify how to handle duplicates. Duplicates are values in reports that correspond to the same data. But there is several ways of handling that. You have complete duplicates. That is the data which are exactly the same with the same value. You have consistent duplicate that are data which are exactly the same but with different values. For example, in the balance sheet, you may have rounded values, and in detailed tables, you may have non-rounded values, and these typically they are different. And you have non-consistent duplicate, for example, where the values are quite different, and typically this is an error. So you have to define what kind of duplicate you accept. And you have to know, for example, for banking supervision using XML, duplicates are forbidden. If you use CSV, because there may be several files reporting the same data, only complete duplicates are accepted. And for ESMA report, you may accept consistent duplicate as well. And you have also submission reported rules. For example, how to submit your report to your collector. What kind of technology is used for the transfer? Do you use FTP? Do you use web service? What security mechanisms are to be used? What is the format of the file? Is it a XBRL report package, a plain file, or a zip file? What are the periods to report? Is it annual or semestrial or quarterly report? What are the deadlines? And what kind of meta information must you provide to the collector? For example, in some case, you may have to define the number of the report. When you resubmit, you have to increment the number of the report to allow problem. So these rules have to be defined in the filing rules. And you may have also some specific filing rules. For example, in the European banking and insurance supervision, we have introduced the concept of filing indicator. So filing indicator is a fact which may be used to specify that you report reporting unit that may correspond to some table. For example, big banks, only big banks have to report some detailed information. So report related to this detailed information, you have a filing indicator, and you define whether you report this information or not. And these filing indicators are very important for the checks for the XBRL formula to avoid any issues in the formula. For example, when you have a breakdown only for some information, when you use implicit filtering in the XBRL formula, you may end up with some issues if you don't have this filing indicator. You have also some issue about some filing rules needed for multi-currency reporting. Typically, when you report information in several currency, you don't only change the unit. It's better to have also taxonomy defined dimensions, specifying the unit to avoid any problem. So this kind of filing rules have to be defined as well. And next slide. Thomas, could you go to the next slide?
Uh,
Okay. So typically, when you define finding rules, you have to avoid what I called exotic constraints. For example, we have seen some cases when a collector prescribes element ordering in the report. I have also seen a collector requiring that all the elements are reported, even if they are not, the amount is null. The reason was in Banque de France with proposed skeleton instances containing all possible facts, and some preparers use these skeleton instances and filled only the data that with when done null amount. So the report was full of null value facts. You have to avoid also restatement of specification rules. For example, when there is a rule in the specification, you redefine it. You have to allow to avoid aussi specific convention. For example, when you in insurance supervision, we had to introduce enumeration with more than one value possible. This was not possible with XBRL specification extensible enumeration at that time. So, and this was very was needed because it was requested by the regulation. So we had to introduce the convention for this kind of information, waiting for the specification. So typically, this has to be avoided as much as possible, but not always the case. And the solution for that is to be aware of the need of the requirements of the regulation as soon as possible, to be able to define the specification fulfilling this need if possible. But the issue is the time it takes to make specification. So for some time, we have used this specific mechanism in insurance supervision in Europe. And clearly, we have also to avoid asking the preparers to cope with the limits of the collector. For example, I have seen in the very early stage of XBRL, some collector accepting UTF character encoded data, but only with value corresponding to ANSI values. For example, for the typographic apostrophe quote was not accepted with this system. And I've seen very recently a case for a collector having made a mistake in the codes in the taxonomy and asking the preparers to send the wrong code. And typically, this is not acceptable. So, there are some. So you have to distinguish some rules that are automatable. For example, that are. Oops.
Right.
That's an issue. You have to do that could be checked by the system from rules that are not possible to check. For example, if you have rules related to the language, and some data have to be reported in French, and some data have to be reported in English. This may be the case in Luxembourg when they accept a lot of languages. This typically is not possible to check by software, so it's a guidance, not a rule. The other issue is accuracy of decimal attribute. Typically, this could not be checked by the taxonomy, or it may cause a lot of issues. So this has to be made by extra processing outside of XBRL specification. The other topic is the use of nil of missing facts, but you don't have a fact. There may be some cases, for example, the fact it's not possible for you to report this fact because you don't, for example, you don't have activity of this kind. You may have some activity, but the activity is zero. So you have to define how to determine, if needed, using I don't report the fact, or I report the fact with a zero value, or I report the fact with nil. Okay, next slide. So, so the idea is to use as much as possible XBRL technology. For example, as much as possible, XBRL formula. Okay, so we have tried in Banque de France, for example, in the early stages. We wanted to check that the value for some amounts were positive. So we have used XML constraint, defining a fact as being a positive integer, a positive decimal. But the issue was as soon as reporting the value of fact was not positive, the report was rejected at XML level, forbidding any other processing. So with whatever with the processing ended at every error. Okay, so we have modified that and to introduce this check like the XBRL formula. But you have to be aware also that there may be some issues, some performance issues for formula. For example, in XBRL International provided the LEI taxonomy, checking the structure of the LEI. LEI is identification of preparers in the world. So typically, an LEI is 20 character long, and there are some constraints on the structure. And the two last characters is a cyclic-oriented check. Okay. There is a taxonomy in XBRL checking the LEI using XBRL formula. But the issue for XBRL reports, as there is an LEI in every context, and you may have thousands of contexts in a given report. So we may check, and the LEI is always the same, and there is a check that the LEI is the same. But the issue is that we checked several thousand times the structure of the LEI that was the same. So you have to be aware. So we had this constraint, and we have removed this processing. We have to have this constraint that there are there may be some performance issues using this kind of formula rules. Of course, to facilitate the discussion, every rule should have a unique identifier, a persistent identifier, to allow discussion between the preparers and the collector when there are some issues. And this identifier should be unique. And in my opinion, that's what I put into bracket, XI may or should provide a registry of finding rules. It's maybe in if the list of things to be done, maybe not very prioritary, but it's maybe helpful to have this list. Of course, it should provide human readable description between. It's very difficult for some people to understand the XBRL technology. And when the principal responsible for reporting as an issue, it should be possible for him to understand what kind of issue it is. We also should provide a test suite. A test suite is a set of reports following the filing rules and not following the filing rules, to be able to test the collector system, first step, and maybe also to be able to do some testing with the software provider for preparers. One thing very important is that it is important to offer a test service. So a test service should be provided by collector to allow preparers to test their filing before the deadline, before maybe all the data are collected. And it's also very important that this service is open to software provider. And also some certain banks are reluctant to open their system to software provider. But this is very important. I have worked for that in Banque de France. But you have also be able to take care of specificities for this kind of service. For example, in the ESMA, in some collector for ESMA reporting, there is in the metadata for the reports the number of the report. When you send a report, you have a number one. When you resend the report, you have a number two. So this number is limited to 99, 2 digits. And for a preparer, bank, it's or listed company, 99 is okay. But for a software provider testing their system, clearly, I think it's not enough. So I have sent a comment to ESMA. For now, we have not yet received any response. But for me, this is an issue. This test service, of course, may be open long before deadline. And for example, in the EIOPA taxonomies, they provide a first version of the taxonomy with possible errors, and they provide before the deadline a second version, corrective version, correcting of all issues that have been seen in the previous state. Of course, filing rules must provide examples. They use the correct wording, not always the case. I've seen, for example, in a recent filing rules, European filing rules case when they consider that 10 and 10.00 are not the same value. Clearly, it's not a good example. It's not right. Yes, collectors should provide early versions for comments of their filing rules, and they have to discuss with preparers. And in France, Banque de France is very active in XBRL France, and we have work group in which we discuss with preparers and with software provider very early. And collectors should be very aware, to be very careful to copy paste the rules because we see a lot of cases when the copy paste was not okay. Okay, next slide.
Well, that's the end, Eric. So
That's
thank
the
you
end. Yes.
for the explanations. Just to do a link with the links to the guidance that has been published by XBRL International. And that's not the end of the webinar because we have a few questions. I remind to everyone connected that you can ask the question on the Q&A system from Zoom. I don't think we get a question, an open question yet, but don't hesitate. The first question is always the most difficult to get, but don't hesitate to ask question to Eric. For the next few minutes, we will have his answers. And I have a personal question. You finished your presentation about insisting about the quality of the rules. But maybe something we wanted to know is how to determine which filing rules are truly necessary. And maybe I'll let you comment on how to know which one we have to publish before they are quality.
Yes. So I think this is an issue. So we have to balance between the position, the XII position, that collectors must accept whatever is valid. So we had some issue at Banque de France with that because we received, as I told you, some instances where, for example, with a lot of duplicated context, there was a different context for every fact. We have received reports when you have a lot of figures after the decimal point. That was not useful given the accuracy. And clearly a lot of numbers, and I don't recall, but maybe several tens of figures after the decimal point. And typically, this was valid, but this hindered the performance. As I told you, we receive near the deadline, we receive several thousands reports a day, and the system it's a Dirac impulsion, and the systems have to cope with that, and it's very difficult. So we have to buy very expensive and very expensive system. And clearly for the planet, it's not, this is not good. There are some there are also some cases. For example, we saw some very specific, for example, for the prefixes. So for every fact, there was a XMLNS attribute clearly not needed. So clearly, this is valid. For XML, it's valid, but it's in their performance, and it hinder also the facility for the support if there is some issue for the support to cope with the issues because they have some difficulty to understand the situation. For example, we have also some discussions about some filing rules. For example, in the banking insurance supervision, we have filing rules that said that the reference of the software used to generate the report has to be defined with the version. Typically, this is very useful because when you have a bug in a software, in a given software, so we handle this issue in the collector system. There's some discussion with the support, and we saw that the given version of a software has some issue. Typically, all the customer of this version will have the same issue. And for us, it's very important to know that the reports have been generated. So it is allows the support to directly answer the preparers. Oh, you have this version of the software, and this version has an issue, and you should contact your provider to get the next version of the system. And typically, we use the XML parameter to do that. And because in Eurofilings, there was some persons arguing the fact that this was not typically business information. This has nothing to do with the taxonomy. So we were not allowed to add this information in taxonomy. But clearly, I think this should be in the taxonomy.
Okay, thank you. But I understand from this that doing filing rules is like a sort of art. It's quite difficult. So maybe sometimes they have to evolve. So what are the best practice to manage with the rule versioning and backward compatibility when there are new filing rules proposed by the taxonomy issuer?
Yes, so typically the evolution is very clear. It's filing rules is removed, because, for example, when you introduced a new technology waiting for XBRL documentation, so you use these filing rules, this convention to be used. But when the XBRL evolve, taxonomy has to evolve, and this information should be removed, and the XBRL specification have to be used in the future. There is also an issue about resubmission. So we had some issue because typically when you software provider in Banque de France, when they evolve the filing rules, they evolve the system. But the resubmission of old versions were rejected because they didn't follow the new filing rules. So typically we have to version the filing rules, but also the system. Okay, so that the systems accept we make a correspondence between the version of the report and the version of the filing rules.
So
We didn't see a need for the time being to have a version number for filing rules, but maybe in the future, but I don't think so. I don't think that. Typically,
at least
the version is for the set of filing rules.
maybe an ID for each rule, so it's easier to know which one is
Well,
selected.
we change the ID, yes.
Yeah, and a change log if needed. I got a question from a software vendor, just to remind maybe as a summary, what are the infrastructure that should be provided for software vendors for implementing those filing rules or understanding those filing rules, or what are the key ingredients at minimum?
Yes, so I think that so we should provide conformance suite. The conformance suite are I think not for vendors mainly, but for collectors to check that they reject the reports that are not fulfilling these rules. But software provider should also have a look at this test suite to check that their software follows the rules. We should also so the collector should also provide a test system, as I told you early. And we should. I have determined with some central banks in Europe that didn't want to allow software provider to access their system. So we should do that. But the issue we had with this that some preparers didn't use software, specific XBRL software, but generates only XBRL files from typically not checking the value, but using a test system to check that the report was correct.
Okay,
Okay.
and
So typically, so we had some issue with the size of the test system. Typically for collector, I think a collector may accept that there is some limitation of the test system, but clearly we should the collector should accept software provider with for testing.
yeah, and I will add as a personal point of view that sometimes it's even newcomers because some authorities in certain cases just open it to software vendors who already have a customer, which make it more complicated. But we're going out of time, so I will go to the last question and maybe with a really short answer. Um, uh, Maybe just with one word. Should we publish the filing rules before or after the taxonomy is finalized? I will ask you to be really short so we can conclude this webinar with this final question.
So I think that collectors should use or regulators should use the system used by IOPA. So they provide a first version of taxonomy with filing rules, maybe first version of filing rules, and then gathering the feedback from collectors because it's the European authority, from software vendors as well, and then provided final version of the taxonomy, suppose final version of taxonomy, where with suppose version of filing rules if there are some changes. So typically, it should be at, I think, about six months before the deadline, before the end of the report period.
Okay, so thank you very much, Eric, for this. I see no further questions, so thank you for your presentation and answers. Thank you for those who were connected to listen to us today. And I also want to do a special thank you to Revati, Catalina, and other members of the IATF who have been preparing this webinar with Eric. due to technical problems, Catalina could not do the introduction, but she is still there to prepare and help us to prepare, and Revati to have all the logistics. So thank you all, and see you probably in another webinar on those questions about standards and publication by XBRL International. Thank you.